President Obama arrives in Brussels ahead of a meeting with EU leaders. The president preparing to give a speech in about 45 minutes criticizing Russia. Executive Director of Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, Marion Smith, joins us to talk about Putin's aggressive actions and the motives behind them.
And the search continues for missing people in Arlington, Washington. The number of unaccounted for jumps from 108 to 176 yesterday. Expectations have been described as grim, as no one has been found alive since Saturday. We'll be joined by Como Radio's John Repp to get the latest from the area and review the efforts being made by authorities.
And 20 years after Schindler's List got its original release, a new book detailing the film's legacy and the establishment of the USC Shoah Foundation hits the stores. Executive Director of the USC Shoah Foundation, Stephen D. Smith, joins us for an exclusive interview as America's Forum continues.
What we are doing today is we try to maintain a capability of Ukrainian military to fight. We made a number of steps in order to prepare the military to defend Ukrainian territory. But in any case, what we need a support from the international community. We need a technical and military support to overhaul the Ukrainian military, to modernize it, and to be ready not just to fight, but be ready to win.
Right there is Ukrainian President Arseniy Yatsenyuk. He tells reporters his country is preparing for every possible scenario as a Russian occupation remains a very real possibility. Meanwhile, President Obama is in Brussels for talks with leaders of the European Union and NATO to discuss Ukraine and other transatlantic issues. He began his trip by visiting a cemetery in Flanders where U.S. soldiers were killed in World War I and are buried there. The president is due to speak today to stress the importance of European security to the U.S. and warn Russia against threatening international stability. I believe the speech has already happened. The president warned against decreasing military spending for NATO countries. On Monday, leaders from the U.S., Britain, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan said they were suspecting their participation with Russia and the G8 until Moscow. They're suspending that participation until Moscow changes course.
The G8 becoming the G7, but for how long? That's one of the questions we'll be dealing with as we welcome you back to our third hour of America's Forum. I'm J.D. Hayworth.
And I'm John Bachman. Thanks for sticking around and being with us here on the third hour of the show.
And as we talk about what has transpired, so often I've mentioned what Mark Twain had to say, history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. We used to see a Soviet Union in an expansionistic mode, especially post-World War II. Now the Russian Federation possibly repeating that. We are joined now via Skype by Marion Smith, the Executive Director of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. Marion, we'd like to welcome you right now to America's Forum.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, Marion, do you think Putin, a former KGB apparatchik after all, is prepared to make further incursions into Ukraine?
Well, if you look at what's going on, there are still troops being amassed on the Ukrainian-Russian border, and more every day. And so it looks like he's certainly leaving that option open. It's important to also remember that the authorization given to Putin, officially within Russia, giving him authorization to use troops, covered not only Crimea, but all of Ukraine. And there was no sunset clause in there. So in terms of Russian law, he has authorization to use military force in Ukraine proper, and there's no limitation in terms of time on that.
There's a couple things we've heard recently, JD, and one of them came from Pat Buchanan on the show today, talking about Putin making this incursion into Crimea as a defensive move, not as an offensive move, as a defensive move. Also, the president saying yesterday that Vladimir Putin is in a position of weakness, and that's why he invaded the Ukraine. What's your take on those two ideas?
I think Vladimir Putin has invaded Ukraine because he realized that the Ukrainian people no longer wanted to live within the sphere of influence, the orbit of Moscow. They wanted to continue their path towards more democratic reform and the rule of law represented today by the EU and the United States. The Ukrainian people ousted Putin's man in Kiev, Yanukovych, and Putin responded by invading Crimea, taking it away from Ukraine. And I don't think he had any justification to do so.
Marion, it prompts another question, and that is when you strip away the different names, we remember the rise of the Soviet Union beyond the borders of Russia, eventually eclipsing basically all of Eastern Europe behind what Winston Churchill famously called the Iron Curtain. Is Putin now trying to create a new, perhaps we would call it neo-Soviet or post-Soviet empire?
Well, I don't think Putin is motivated by any sort of communist ideology, but it's certainly clear that he views the collapse of the Soviet Union, in his words, as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the last century. And he blames the United States for that. And what did he do in Georgia? Well, he took back pieces of territory away from Georgia, and that is territory that used to belong to the Soviet Union. The same with Crimea. So it does look like, at least territorially, he is trying to recobble together the old Soviet empire.
And what do you think, Marion, the extent of that, you know, whatever that may look like, a new version of the Soviet empire? You talked about those territories in the nation of Georgia. Now we're talking about Crimea. Moldova's been mentioned as well as another potential incursion spot from Putin. Well, what do you really think Putin's mind is at right now, and what he thinks a new version of an empire might look like in his eyes?
Well, I think it is a version of regional hegemony in which Moscow determines what's going to happen politically, economically, and foreign policy-wise in what used to be the former Soviet space. Now, that Soviet space encompasses what is today EU member states, NATO member states, and we have heard fairly belligerent remarks even about the Russian-speaking population in Estonia. Estonia, of course, being a NATO member, an ally of the United States, which has a significant Russian-speaking population, which is, of course, what Putin used to justify his going into Crimea.
And of course, when we hear about the different ethnically Russian populations, there is a mindset, Marion, that this would be a kind of jigsaw puzzle or a nibbling around the edges. And yet there's another school of thought saying that Vladimir Putin may be intent on creating what we might call a Eurasian super state. Do you believe the latter? And if so, what are those indications?
Well, sure. I mean, I think that would be, in essence, what I just described, a regional hegemon based in Moscow, you know, setting the rules of a sort of regional order that would be another pole, if you will, another pole of power that's not based in Beijing and not based in Washington, D.C. And I think that is not going to succeed. If you just take the economic angle, Russia's economy depends overwhelmingly and very unsustainably on energy exports. And so I don't think he has the economic power. I certainly don't think he has the political legitimacy to provide leadership for that sort of order. And as we see, Ukraine, which he views as an essential piece of the puzzle of whatever he's trying to put together, doesn't want it. Ukraine wants to be a part of the West.
Well, Marion, we also heard the president speaking from the Netherlands talking about that he didn't believe, at least because the international community is not officially recognizing the annexation, the takeover of Crimea. President Obama saying that he doesn't believe that Crimea is lost for good. Do you think that statement was misguided?
Well, we see that the territory that was taken away from Georgia, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, still effectively belongs to Russia. And there has been absolutely no concerted effort to see that that's not the case. So I think that Putin is operating with a really strong hand here. We have a weak hand because at every point that he's pushed, we've allowed him to take a little bit more, first of all, territory. So let's just leave it at that. So there are two pieces of territory he has now taken away from Georgia. One piece of territory he's taken away from Ukraine, and it's not clear exactly where he wants to stop.
Marion, we appreciate very much your perspective on this. Less than a minute left. Tell us something about your organization, how it seeks to educate people about communism or the post-communist world.
Well, it's our 20th year this year, and during that time we have been trying to educate the American people keep alive the memory of the more than 100 million victims of communism around the world. As we celebrate the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, I think we're having to grapple with the very toxic legacy of Soviet communism. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I encourage your viewers to go to victimsofcommunism.org and find out.
All right, we thank you very much for your time, Marion, and we'll make sure that our viewers go there and check out that website, and we'll check it out as well. Great conversation, and we'll have you back here on America's Forum.
Sure look forward to it. When we return, another tough story to talk about, John. What transpired to that huge mudslide in Washington State, the search for victims, and some of the stories there. A live report from Washington State when we come back on America's Forum.